No one expected that a small, neutral country, surrounded by war, would become one of the key stages of the world's greatest intelligence confrontation. Switzerland, known for its silence, banking secrecy, and alpine valleys, turned into a crossroads of information where the interests of all warring powers converged. Letters, rumors, and reports flowed into its city's data that could and would change the course of the war. Among the quiet streets of Zurich and Bern, a network was born, one that the world would only learn about decades later. That network would come to be known as the Lucy Ring. Its members' weapons were not guns or tanks, but paper, ink, and radio signals. In the early 1940s, Switzerland lived under constant pressure. Around it, the continent burned. Inside, a fragile calm prevailed. Neutrality demanded careful balance, yet information crossed borders more easily than soldiers ever could. Across Europe, intelligence services fought invisible wars of their own. The Allies needed access to the Reich's most guarded secrets, the kind that decided entire campaigns. It seemed impossible to know where the next strike would fall, or which reserves were being shifted to the front. But in Zurich, beneath the cover of commercial meetings and humanitarian organizations, an operation began that would later be recognized as one of the most effective espionage efforts of the war. The Lucy network was built by Swiss, German, and Austrian anti-fascists, journalists, engineers, radio operators, even disillusioned officers. At the center stood a quiet, unassuming man with a gift for collecting secrets and remaining invisible. His codename was Lucy. His real name was Rudolf Rössler, a German émigré, former publisher, and a man connected to high-ranking officers inside Germany. He lived modestly in a small apartment, surrounded by papers, books, and radio equipment. To his neighbors, he was just another intellectual. They could not imagine that through his hands passed intelligence that could alter the fate of armies. Rössler was no professional spy. He became a link between German sources and Allied intelligence, acting through intermediaries. The data he provided stunned analysts with its accuracy, troop movements, operational plans, even the timing of major offensives. The plans for Operation Citadel, the size of divisions, the location of command posts, all of it reached Allied hands through Switzerland. For a long time, no one could explain how such top-level information was leaking from within the Reich itself. Neutral Switzerland allowed these communication channels to exist almost openly. The country hosted diplomatic missions of every major power, news agencies, and humanitarian offices. Under these covers, radio transmissions were sent, microfilms exchanged, and coded messages passed in diplomatic pouches. Each piece of information traveled a long route from Berlin to Geneva, then through couriers to Moscow, London, or Washington. The entire operation relied on trust, discipline, and near-perfect secrecy. Unlike other spy networks of the era, Lucy's group was unarmed. They carried no explosives, planned no sabotage. Their mission was purely informational to deliver intelligence that could prevent disasters. Thanks to the data coming out of Switzerland, the Allies were able to anticipate German offensives and adjust strategies that saved thousands of lives. One of the most decisive moments came in 1943, when Rössler's transmissions revealed the Wehrmacht's preparations for the Battle of Kursk. The Soviets were able to fortify defenses and blunt what was meant to be the Reich's last great victory in the East. Swiss authorities were aware that something larger than diplomacy was unfolding within their borders, but they had no direct proof. Officially, Switzerland remained neutral. Yet under that neutrality, couriers traveled, packages changed hands, and sometimes humanitarian missions and intelligence routes overlapped. The International Red Cross, headquartered in Geneva, was coordinating prisoner exchanges and medical aid shipments, efforts that occasionally crossed paths with Lucy's couriers and radio lines. Doctors and agents might use the same routes, the same postal channels, even the same coded systems. For the people of the Lucy network, the line between espionage and humanitarian work often blurred. They knew that every message transmitted across the airwaves carried risk not just of arrest, but of destroying the fragile neutrality that protected them. Radios were hidden in apartments, behind curtains and false walls. Transmission windows were timed to the second. One mistake, one intercepted signal, and the entire network could vanish overnight. Yet they continued. Their goal was not glory nor revenge. It was survival for others. Each coded transmission could mean the difference between life and death on the front. Each intercepted German order could save an entire division from ambush. Their quiet work embodied a paradox. The idea that knowledge, passed through invisible channels, could preserve what remained of humanity in a dehumanized war. By 1943, the network had grown. New couriers joined, some knowingly, others believing they were simply helping with humanitarian correspondence. Reports were disguised as medical summaries or transport documents. Under this cover, intelligence reached Allied command centers, while at times the same couriers carried lists of prisoners, casualty records, or requests for medical supplies. In this strange intersection of espionage and compassion, the Lucy network operated with remarkable success. For Roessler and his collaborators, morality and secrecy became inseparable. They acted not as heroes, but as individuals trying to prevent catastrophe. The world was collapsing around them, yet in the quiet rooms of Swiss towns, people with typewriters and radios tried to preserve what little humanity remained: information, truth, and hope. They never knew how long they could continue, nor how close discovery might be. But the network endured. Its signals crossed borders like the faint pulse of an invisible machine working silently for those who would never know the names of the people who had helped to save them. We could not believe, at first, how deep the channels of communication ran beneath the surface of neutrality. The Lucy network was not a collection of spies in the conventional sense. It was a living system of information, stretching from German military offices to Swiss apartments, from coded telegraphs to Allied command desks. Each participant knew only fragments of the whole, yet the pattern they formed changed the course of the war. By the middle of 1943, the intelligence transmitted from Switzerland had begun to influence Allied planning across multiple theaters. Reports on German troop concentrations in Europe and logistical movements in occupied territories were reaching London weeks before similar information was confirmed by aerial reconnaissance. Analysts noticed that the data was astonishingly precise. Schedules of railway transport, numbers of armored units, even fuel consumption figures all appeared exact. Behind each message lay invisible effort. Radio operators worked in cramped rooms, surrounded by static and fear. They listened for the faint pulse of Allied receivers and transmitted in coded bursts, never longer than a few minutes to avoid detection. Interception stations from all sides filled the air with competing frequencies. To send even a short transmission required discipline, timing, and a kind of faith that someone, somewhere, was listening. The Allies soon realized that this source, codenamed Lucy, was unique. The accuracy of the intelligence suggested access to German General Staff documents. It was almost impossible to believe that such leaks could occur without discovery. Some speculated that high-ranking officers opposed to the regime were secretly feeding information to Switzerland. Others thought that the data came from diplomatic monitoring or even Allied double agents inside Berlin. The truth, as later revealed, was a combination of all these paths converging into one quiet Swiss apartment. From Switzerland, the intelligence traveled along separate lines. One branch reached Moscow through the Soviet espionage network known as the Red 3. Another line extended toward London, where British intelligence evaluated the same material. Often, both sides received identical reports, sometimes within hours of each other. The Lucy Ring became a neutral bridge between the world's most suspicious allies. It was not only military strategy that moved along these lines. Humanitarian information passed with it. Lists of captured soldiers, locations of medical facilities, details of supply shortages. The same couriers who carried coded notes also delivered Red Cross parcels or messages concerning prisoners of war. For many of them, the distinction between espionage and aid no longer existed. They were simply carrying what needed to be carried. In the archives of the International Red Cross, records still exist showing that some Swiss couriers delivered both medical supplies and sealed diplomatic envelopes on the same trips. Officially, these were humanitarian missions. Unofficially, they became lifelines of information, reaching battlefields and occupied regions that no army could safely enter. On several occasions, Lucy's contacts used these routes to send coordinates of prisoner camps and hospitals to the Allies, helping them avoid accidental bombings. Meanwhile, in Germany, suspicions began to rise. Security officials noticed that Allied operations were countering German plans too precisely. Investigations intensified, but the source remained invisible. The neutrality of Switzerland created a barrier that could not easily be breached. Even as agents infiltrated embassies and courier networks, the center of the Lucy Ring remained untouched. Its members maintained silence, their activities disguised as harmless administrative work or journalistic correspondence. In early 1944, as the war turned decisively against the Axis, the network's reports became even more crucial. They included details on the relocation of divisions from the Eastern Front, the construction of fortifications along the Atlantic Wall, and the redeployment of aircraft to defend the Reich. Each transmission represented a small victory in a vast unseen battle of information. Allied planners used the intelligence to adjust bombing routes, anticipate counteroffensives, and coordinate the supply of advancing troops. For the people within the Lucy network, this success came with constant fear. They lived double lives, ordinary citizens by day, invisible messengers by night. Every knock at the door carried the potential of arrest. Yet, they continued, driven by the understanding that what they transmitted was saving lives on both sides. Information about medical facilities, humanitarian corridors, and the status of prisoners often traveled through the same frequencies as troop reports. The act of communication itself became a form of mercy. Far from Europe, in the Pacific theater, similar networks emerged under Allied coordination, documenting acts of medical assistance given to captured enemies. Though separate in geography, these efforts reflected a shared idea that knowledge and compassion could coexist even amid global conflict. Reports from field hospitals on the islands were sometimes transmitted through the same radio protocols first refined by European intelligence. The link was indirect but symbolic. The same discipline of secrecy that carried battle plans also carried news of aid. As 1944 progressed, Switzerland became a hive of coded messages. In the cafes of Bern and Zurich, men in civilian clothes quietly observed each other, not knowing who served which side. Yet through the noise and the layers of deception, the Lucy Ring endured. Its couriers walked city streets with envelopes that contained no visible danger, yet more power than any weapon. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Lucy network was its moral consistency. It avoided acts of violence and focused on information that could prevent greater destruction. When Allied analysts realized how much of their forewarning came from a neutral country, they chose to protect the source at all costs. The name Lucy became synonymous with reliability and mystery. To the world beyond, Switzerland remained untouched by the flames of war. But behind closed curtains, invisible messages crossed borders every night. The people sending them did not know one another's real names, nor did they seek recognition. Their only shared purpose was to ensure that knowledge, once obtained, was used to spare rather than destroy. By late 1944, the Ring's transmissions began to slow. Many of its sources inside Germany were now under suspicion or dead. Yet the network had already accomplished what no army could. It had bridged enemies through information, allowing even acts of compassion to travel with secrecy. The Lucy Ring had become both a symbol of intelligence and a testament to the possibility of humanity surviving within war's machinery. By the final year of the war, the silence around the Lucy network had become both its greatest weapon and its shield. The world knew almost nothing about the system that had quietly undermined some of Hitler's most ambitious operations. Even within Allied intelligence, few understood where the information came from or who risked their lives to deliver it. What mattered was the result: accurate forecasts, prevented disasters, and countless lives spared. As 1945 approached, Europe was collapsing under the weight of total war. Cities burned, lines shifted, and communications disintegrated. Yet, in Switzerland, neutral and surrounded by chaos, the radios of the Lucy Ring still functioned. Their signals, faint but precise, continued to reach Allied receivers. The last reports from Roessler's group described troop withdrawals, shortages of fuel, and the gradual disintegration of German command structure. They transmitted no triumph, no emotion, only data. Then the signal stopped. For the Allied analysts who had depended on those transmissions, it was as if a light had gone out in the fog. There was no farewell, no trace of arrest or betrayal. The network simply dissolved into the quiet of post-war Switzerland. When the German surrender came, those who had listened to Lucy's messages understood that they might never learn the full story. After the war, investigators from multiple countries tried to reconstruct the operation. They traced radio logs, diplomatic correspondences, and fragments of coded traffic. The evidence pointed toward Roessler, but revealed almost nothing about his sources. He refused to name anyone, claiming that his duty had ended with the war. His statement was short: the truth had served its purpose, and now silence would serve it better. This refusal only deepened the mystery. Some believed that Roessler's contacts were officers from within the German general staff, perhaps those secretly opposed to Hitler's rule. Others thought that he was an intermediary for British or even Swiss intelligence, passing data disguised as neutral correspondence. A few suggested that Lucy had never existed as a single person, but rather as a composite of channels working in parallel. Whatever the truth, the results were undeniable. Allied commanders had benefited from insights that had shortened the war and reduced the scale of suffering. At the same time, humanitarian organizations in Switzerland continued their work of post-war recovery. The same communication routes once used to transfer intelligence were now carrying lists of prisoners, medical records, and requests for family reunification. The invisible line that had once delivered war plans now transmitted the details of survival names, locations, and signs of life. In that sense, the spirit of the Lucy network endured, transformed from espionage into relief. In Geneva, members of the International Red Cross reviewed archives of wartime transmissions and noticed familiar formats in coded messages, identical routing marks, similar call signs. They realized that humanitarian and intelligence operations had coexisted more closely than anyone had imagined. The couriers who once risked their lives to carry classified documents were now delivering vaccines, food, and aid to displaced civilians. The tools of secrecy were being reused for healing. Rudolf Roessler lived quietly after the war. He avoided public attention, rarely gave interviews, and maintained that his work had been motivated not by politics, but by conscience. He had witnessed the rise of tyranny and believed that information, not weapons, was the only moral means of resistance left to him. His silence was his protection, but also his legacy. In the early 1952, Western intelligence agencies, now reorganized for the Cold War, revisited the Lucy files. They discovered that several of the wartime codes used by Roessler's network matched early encryption systems later employed by humanitarian missions and diplomatic couriers. It was as if the pattern of the Lucy ring had imprinted itself onto post-war Europe, the idea that truth could travel quietly, crossing even hostile borders. For historians, the Lucy network became a symbol of the invisible balance between secrecy and morality. It demonstrated that intelligence could serve life rather than destruction. Many of the reports attributed to Lucy contained not just military plans, but information about conditions in occupied territories, hospitals, refugee camps, and field units, providing aid to captured soldiers. These records showed that even within the machinery of war, acts of compassion were documented and communicated. By the 1962nd, declassified archives began to reveal the scale of the network's impact. Allied strategists confirmed that several decisive maneuvers, including preparations for D-Day and counteroffensives in Italy and the Eastern Front, had been influenced by data originating from Switzerland. The precision of those reports had saved not only Allied troops, but also reduced civilian losses by avoiding unnecessary targets. Yet, despite its significance, the Lucy network never became a household name. Its members preferred anonymity. Their greatest achievement was not exposure, but restraint, proving that silence, discipline, and intelligence could carry moral weight equal to open heroism. Theirs was a victory measured in lives unlost. The world, when it finally learned of the network, reacted with astonishment. That neutral Switzerland, a nation often accused of inaction, had harbored one of the most effective intelligence systems of the war, seemed almost paradoxical. But this paradox was part of the story. In neutrality, Lucy found invisibility. In invisibility, she found strength. Today, remnants of the Lucy network's work remain in archives and museums. Faded radio logs, coded sheets, and carefully typed summaries of intercepted plans. In these quiet documents lies a record of resistance through information, a reminder that knowledge, when used with humanity, can become an instrument of peace. Among the records preserved are also reports from Pacific and European humanitarian missions describing acts of medical aid to captured enemies. These documents, transmitted through similar encrypted methods, show a continuum of effort from secret intelligence during war to coordinated compassion afterward. The same precision that once served strategy now served recovery. In this transformation lies the moral essence of the Lucy story. Intelligence was not only about knowing what to destroy, but what to protect. The agents who risked their lives to send coded messages understood that the information they carried could prevent more deaths than it caused. Their silence after the war was not secrecy, but humility. The Lucy network remains one of the most extraordinary examples of quiet heroism, a system built on trust, precision, and conscience. It proved that even in a world consumed by violence, truth could travel silently, cross borders without armies, and reach those who needed it most. In the end, the world was right to be astonished not because the network had existed, but because it had succeeded without hatred, without force, and without leaving a trace louder than a signal fading into static. That silence, in its way, helped save the world.